Have you ever wondered what could make a proud German officer question everything she believed about her own country? In the summer of 1944, behind the barbed wire of a Kansas prison camp, one woman tasted something she'd always called pig feed. That single bite of sweet American corn would challenge a lifetime of arrogance and teach her that sometimes the smallest flavor can change the way you see an entire world. Helga Richter stood by the window of barracks. 14 arms crossed, gaze fixed. From there, she could see Americans gathered around makeshift grills. Thin smoke drifted upward, light gray, the kind that came with cooking, not burning. Barbecue, someone muttered behind her in German. On the open field, soldiers turned whole ears of corn, brushing the husks with melted butter. A tall sergeant handled the tongs like a craftsman, explaining something to the prisoners on kitchen duty. "They're cooking pig feed," Helga said. Lieselman chuckled, then fell quiet. "We used to grind it down during shortages. Even then, no one ate it whole. They seem proud of it." A guard's voice carried over the fence. One word she caught clearly: tradition. The men laughed, passed plates, ate straight from the cob, as if it were roast meat. Helga stepped back. The barracks smelled of damp wood and sweat, yet that strange sweetness from the yard crept in anyway. It didn't belong here. "You're invited," called Corporal Mitchell, the American woman assigned to morale duty. Her German came stiff but polite. "Cultural dinner tonight. Sweet corn and apple pie. Is this a joke?" Mitchell shook her head. "Voluntary. 6 o'clock. Liesel watched her leave. "They're always so polite." Helga didn't answer. By sundown, the camp stirred. Word of the dinner spread half amusement, half suspicion. "You going?" Liesel asked, tying her hair with a strip of cloth. "To watch," Helga said. At the recreation hall, prisoners filed in slowly. Germans clustered near the back arms, folded expressions tight. Across the room, Americans stood behind serving tables stacked with buttered corn and pitchers of water. Someone had hung red streamers, a half-hearted gesture toward celebration. Sergeant Miller held up a cob. "Picked this morning," he said in careful German. "Sweet corn, salt, butter." He peeled the husk back, steam rising. No one moved. "Try," he offered. The silence thickened. A nudge came from behind. Helga stepped forward. The floorboards groaned under her boots. Miller extended the cob again. "Just bite." She took it out of defiance, not curiosity. Butter warmed her fingers. She bit down. Sweet. Surprise flickered, then disappeared behind a frown. She chewed slowly, salt-balancing sugar texture softer than she expected. Miller nodded. Different from field corn. No reply. That night in Barracks 14, Helga washed her hands long after lights out. The sweetness still clung to her skin. The next morning, a corporal read the notice at roll call, "Vowels round and deliberate cultural exchange dinner. Sweet corn and apple pie. Voluntary. 6 o'clock." No one responded. Prisoners stood stiff in the dust hands behind their backs. When dismissed, they turned wordlessly to their chores. Laughter rippled through the barracks later. "More pig feed," someone said. "They'll Americanize us one cob at a time." Helga slipped off her boots, set them beneath the cot. "You going?" a voice asked. Liesel answered before she could. "Of course not. She's just curious. Last time she even smiled." A few chuckles followed, quiet, but enough to draw the line between the unbending and the uncertain. "I didn't smile," Helga said. "You didn't spit it out either," Liesel replied. "That's how it starts." The room smelled of soap and sweat. From the wash station came the rhythm of an axe on wood. Helga folded her uniform with careful creases. Later, while rinsing utensils, she asked the cook what they'd serve. Same as last time, he said, scraping a pot. Grilled corn. Pie. Maybe coffee if the officer's kind. By afternoon, quiet arguments drifted through the barracks. Some would go to taste something different. Others called them weak. Traitors. Liesel, mending a sock, didn't look up. It's only food, but they know what it means. First we eat their corn, then we forget what real food tasted like. Helga rubbed her rough palms. And if it's good, that's what they want? The thought hung heavy. Nobody dared admit that maybe the enemy could make something worth keeping. By 6, the line to the recreation hall formed slowly. Some marched faces set. Others hovered nearby, pretending not to watch. Helga waited at the doorway. Tables stood ready, tin plates stacked neatly. Napkins squared rows of steaming corn and thick pie slices. She took a seat against the wall. The few who came sat silent, eyes lowered. A young American soldier offered a plate. She nodded, set it down untouched. Liesl slipped in beside her, wordless. Sergeant Miller spoke in halting German, naming the farms the woman who baked the pies as though that mattered. Helga lifted the cob butter seeping through her fingers. One bite. Sweet again, too rich, too strange, still good. They'll think they've won, Liesl murmured. No, Helga said, but maybe they didn't lose everything. At nearby tables, someone asked for seconds. Another laughed quietly at a guard's joke. The room filled not with noise, but with the soft release of tension, the sound of people who'd stopped pretending they weren't curious. A cob passed down the table, no words exchanged. It stopped in front of her husk, peeled back like a handle butter pooling in the grooves. Helga hesitated. Around her conversation thinned to murmurs. A few men chewed cautiously, jaws moving with suspicion. Others raised the food to their noses, as if scent alone might betray a trick. No one reached for seconds. The cob rested in her palm, the gold, the shine, the quiet weight of something alive. "Eat it before it gets cold," Sergeant Miller said behind her. No smile, just fact. "It's not field corn," he continued in careful German. "Golden Bantam, from Kansas. Been grown since 1902. His boots creaked as he moved away. A cough broke the stillness. Liesl hunched nearby. Eyes lowered, no judgment, only fatigue. Helga lifted the cob, bit down. Each kernel broke softly, releasing warmth and sweetness. Not the heavy kind of syrup, but a clean, startling flavor, brightened by salt, softened by butter. It tasted like the opposite of war, no rationing, no bitter roots boiled for survival. Food made simply to please. Another bite. The sweetness held. Her chewing slowed. Across the table, 2 younger men exchanged a look. One shrugged and took a bite. Nobody laughed. From the corner, Miller lectured to anyone listening. Field corns feed, sweet corns for people, different crops. His tone as flat as a map reading. Helga set the cob down, wiped her fingers. Butter lingered on her skin. The warmth stayed in her mouth. She drank from the tin cup water, thin as air. The pie remained untouched. A boy across from her pushed his plate aside. "Didn't think Americans could grow anything decent," he muttered. His seatmate didn't reply. Helga rose, leaving most of the corn uneaten. The bench scraped lightly enough to draw eyes, not comment. She walked without aim back toward the barracks. Liesl lay on her cot shoes, off eyes half closed. "You ate it." "I did. And I was wrong." No answer. Helga folded her blanket slowly, hands moving by habit. The gestures belonged to someone else now. Lights dimmed. The barracks settled into the rhythm of sleep, snoring, shifting bunks, the faint rustle of cloth. It wasn't the taste that unsettled her, but the thought behind it. Certainty turned thin as paper. Once she'd told a French prisoner, "We are culture. They are consumers." The words returned dull and empty. She pressed her face to the pillow. The corn had been good, better than anything since Tunisia. Better than she wanted to admit. How many other things had she been wrong about? The ceiling blurred above her until her eyes no longer blinked. By Thursday, her name appeared on the board outside the mess hall agricultural detail. No explanation, just a quiet move from laundry to soil. The garden sat beyond the supply shed near the wire fence, tracing the prairie edge like a rusted seam. 8 prisoners worked the rose tools, clinking against dry earth. Corporal Peterson weighted clipboard under one arm, thermos in the other. His boots were chalked with clay. He pointed toward the stacks of tools. Sweet corn on rows 1 through 6. Field corn next 8. Popcorn down there. Spacing matters thumb deep. You all have thumbs. A few chuckled. Most didn't. Helga knelt, planting one seed after another. Thumb down, drop, cover. Row after row, like laying coins for a forgotten god. Sweat gathered under her collar dust on her sleeves. Peterson moved among them, quiet but watchful. When he stopped beside her, his tone softened. Golden Bantam, Kansas favorite. Folks say it saved more marriages than whiskey. Her eyebrow rose. Man eats well, talks less. Wife gets peace, he added. A small twitch crossed her mouth. He grinned and walked on. Liesl, a few rows away, murmured without looking up. They're watching. Say you're trying to impress them. I'm working. They say that too. The rhythm steadied her thumb seed cover until the noise of the camp faded. After lunch, Peterson handed out watering cans. Field corns for cattle, he said. Tough, dry, tall. Sweet corn, you know. Popcorn needs heat and pressure. Won't pop till it suffers. Someone asked if it grew faster beside potatoes. Only if you sing to it, he replied. A ripple of brief smiles passed through the crew. By late afternoon, the wind picked up. Dust slid across the garden. Tiny green shoots broke through the soil, fragile and stubborn. Life clawing upward through Kansas grit. Peterson paused beside her again. Word is someone reported you. For planting corn. For enjoying it. He shrugged. Some men don't want peace, just a different kind of trench. She kept watering. The soil darkened where it drank. He nodded toward the farthest plot. Popcorn's my favorite. Needs quiet. You talk a lot about corn. I talk about what I understand. The truck jolted over gravel, 16 prisoners in khaki crowded in back. Few spoke. Cornfields rolled by stalks reaching for the pale September sky. The grass lay baked flat color drained by heat. Helga sat near the tailgate arm resting on the rail. The road narrowed toward a weathered farmhouse flanked by 2 barns and an orchard. A faded sign read Schmidt Family Est. 1883. Beneath it, a rusted horseshoe swayed gently in the wind. When the truck stopped, dust rose behind them like smoke. A man and woman waited on the porch, denim apron, steady posture born from long work. The woman held a tray, steam curling above chipped mugs. A younger man leaned on a shovel hat pulled low. They weren't soldiers. Guards stayed back as the prisoners climbed down. Willkommen, the old man said, accent bending the word. Coffee bitte. The tray held mugs and warm cornbread. The scent wheat butter, a trace of molasses, hung in the air. Helga hesitated, but the others stepped forward. No orders, no threats, just quiet courtesy from strangers sharing their name. She took the last mug. Mrs. Schmidt stood beside her husband, nodding at each face. We came from Baden, she said in careful English. My grandfather built this land. First time he saw corn, he called it cattle feed. Then he tasted it. Her laugh was brief, almost shy. The coffee was thin but real. The cornbread melted before the swallow. Their son, Henry, pointed them toward the fields. West Quarter needs clearing. Pick what's left stacked by the barn. Work began without direction. The rows stretched farther than any at camp. Helga joined the rhythm strip toss move. Henry worked beside them, German rough, but clear. Your name, Helga. He nodded and kept pulling. Lunch came under a sycamore. Mrs. Schmidt brought more cornbread and pickled beans. No fences here, no rifles, just chewing and quiet. Helga studied her palms yellowed from husks. Across the yard, the farmhouse windows caught the light, gold and calm. I used to hate this place, Henry said, wiping his brow. Too flat, too quiet. Thought it was stuck in the past. He tossed a husk aside. Then the war came. Quiet didn't seem so bad. Later, while stacking bushels by the shed, Mrs. Schmidt joined Helga. You remind me of my cousin in Stuttgart, she said. She thought Germany was cleaner, smarter. Wouldn't write once the war began. Said we were corrupted by America by corn and capitalism. She brushed straw from her apron. Folks here called corn pig feed, too, but it kept our children alive in the drought. When wheat failed, corn stood. Call it what they like, it's ours now. Helga nodded. The woman didn't wait for more. Work ended at dusk. Dust clung to their clothes. The guards waved them on, no counting, no shouts. By October, the corn stood tall and ready. Wind carried the dry scent of grain across the prairie. At the Schmidt farm, harvest came early, machines churning hands blistered days long. Helga no longer counted hours. She rose with the crew, laced her boots, took her place beside Henry or Mr. Schmidt. By touch alone, she could tell Golden Bantam from Silver Queen, the weight of starch, the dent at the tip, the whisper of readiness in each ear. Mrs. Schmidt called her name more often. Helga, bring that basket or leave the compost for the chickens. The tone had softened, no longer formal. One morning, mail arrived at camp. Men crowded the pile like birds at feed. In her bunk, Helga opened a letter from Bremen, a comrade's neat handwriting warning, "Do not forget who you are. They will win with food, not bullets." She folded it twice and gave no reply. Later, when work slowed, she fed the paper to the stove behind the shed. Flames curled the corners, ink fading to ash. Her hands trembled, once then steadied. Mr. Schmidt saw from the porch but said nothing. Next day, he handed her a notebook filled with planting notes and diagrams. "Sweet corn does better if you turn the soil every 2 years," he explained. "Field corn don't mind much, but sweet's fussy." The pages held his careful penmanship, his lessons from both county agents, and failure. "Well, you read all this, sure did. Knowledge is never treason." She nodded, unsure how to answer. That night they built a fire behind the barn. Frost hadn't come, but the chill hinted at it. Corn roasted near the coal's foil, hissing when butter dripped. The crack of wood bridged long pauses. Mrs. Schmidt stirred a pan nearby. "My mother cried for rye bread when we came here," she said. Thought cornbread was an insult, but it fed us. Helga watched kernels swell and split steam rising into the dark. From the house, a radio murmured news from Europe, Ardennes, Bastogne troop movements. The tone carried no alarm, only fatigue. Mrs. Schmidt passed her a cob wrapped in wax paper. Butter seeped through warm against her palms. The sweetness no longer surprised her. It grounded her, the taste of earth and patience. Leipzig came back in flashes, her mother's kitchen stale bread thin rations. She chewed slowly. Mr. Schmidt tossed another log on the fire. Henry leaned back, eyes half closed. Someone whistled a few notes, then stopped. The radio droned on one voice, replacing another. Names, dates, places. December cut sharper across the plains, but it wasn't the cold that unsettled the camp. Word came before breakfast, a German counteroffensive in the Ardennes. Men gathered near the fences, trading fragments from guards. Some straightened their backs, eating faster, as if posture alone could shape a victory. Helga sorted beans in the supply shed until a guard tapped her shoulder. No reason given. She wiped her hands, followed between 2 escorts. The walk was short, yet every step stretched. A few prisoners looked up. Most didn't. The admin wing stood quiet. No chatter. No typewriter clack. A corporal opened a door. Inside waited 2 chairs, a table, and Liesel sitting rigid with clasped hands, gaze fixed on a crack in the wall. Captain Elwood entered, closing the door as though sealing weather out. His sleeves were rolled high, forearms tanned and rough. "Miss Richter," he said evenly. "We've had reports." He tapped a folder. "Frequent contact with American personnel. Visits to the Schmidt property. Shared meals, private conversation. No response. Several prisoners noted concern. Others called it something stronger." Helga glanced toward Liesel, still unmoving. Elwood leaned forward. "You're not under suspicion of espionage, but you're straying from what's expected." "The family speaks German," she replied. He met her eyes. "So do you." He paused, folding the file shut. "No tribunal, no punishment. Just be aware affiliations have consequences. For you, for others." The room emptied in silence. Liesel didn't follow. One climbed down, waving a strip of black and red cloth. "We took Bastogne," he shouted. Cheers erupted. Men slapped backs, pounded fence posts, sang half-forgotten marches. Helga watched from a distance. The noise swelled, laughter, slogans, fragments of old pride. Liesel melted into the crowd, her step sure, her face turned away. A young soldier brushed past, eyes wide. "You see, Germany still stands." No answer. The gates clanged shut, the guards' hands settled on holsters, and the cheer settled into a hum. That night, the barracks roared again, maps drawn in the dirt. Rumors passed like prayers. Helga lay on her bunk, eyes tracing the beams above. Someone below hummed a victory tune. Snow fell steady before dawn, dusting the camp in silence. By noon, the yard blurred to white barbed wire fading at the edges. Heat from the potbelly stove rippled through the kitchen cornmeal, clinging to every sleeve. Helga stirred batter in a dented tin bowl, elbows tucked close. "Not too much baking soda," she muttered mostly to herself. Two boys watched, one holding a cracked spoon, the other pressing dough with stiff knuckles. None of them were bakers. But rations were thin, and the Americans had shown them a cornbread recipe that stretched what was left. Cheap, filling, didn't need yeast. Behind them, the stove popped. Frost spread across the window pane. A folded Stars and Stripes lay on the bench headline, bold enough to read from the stove, "Germany's last offensive fails." Below it, a photo snow helmet, still bodies half buried. No one mentioned it. The paper wasn't passed around. It simply sat open and quiet, like something already mourned. Boots squeaked in the hallway. Lysel passed the doorway, glanced in, and kept walking. Conversation had thinned in recent days, not fearful, just worn. A gust slipped through the cracks, scattering flour. Helga shut the door and caught sight of Sergeant Miller, coat powdered white, holding something wrapped in wax paper. "Your cornbread smells better than ours," he said, handing it over. She set it on the shelf. He reached into his jacket, pulling a thin booklet. "Came in the last USDA shipment. Thought of you." The cover read, "The Agricultural Review, creased corners soft." Across the front, reconstruction begins, feeding Europe from the ground up. She wiped her hands, flipped through pages, crop rotations, livestock charts, seed yields, then an illustrated spread, sweet corn for continental recovery, drawings of hybrids, Golden Bantam Stowell's evergreen, notes on teaching displaced farmers to replant soil stripped by war. A caption at the bottom, distributed by the U.S. Department of Agriculture in cooperation with Allied Relief. Miller leaned against the wall. "Funny," he said, "how this country got good at feeding strangers, even ones who used to shoot at us." The timer rattled. She pulled the pan out, steam rising in waves. The crust had cracked clean, rough and gold. She cut it into squares, slid one toward him. He took it without hesitation. The boys stood straighter. One reached for the booklet, hesitant. The other watched the snow. Helga brushed crumbs from the table fingers, drifting back to the page kernels, labeled by stage of growth. For a moment, the kitchen disappeared. Only the idea remained. Something once mocked could now rebuild feed repair. No one spoke. Somewhere beyond the fence, a plow scraped frozen dirt. Somewhere across the ocean, boots trudged through snow. March brought a strange warmth to Kansas mud, thick air, heavy. In the mess line, talk circled around surrender. Berlin surrounded fuel, gone fronts collapsing. Some dismissed it, others chewed faster. That morning, 4 civilians arrived, plain coats, clipboards clean. Word spread, quick agricultural officers from Washington recruiting for a post-war cooperation project. Helga hadn't volunteered. Peterson had written her name. The interview took place in the admin wing. An older man asked about crop rotation, irrigation, hybrid yield. His accent hinted at Minnesota. He wrote as she spoke, eyes rarely lifting. "Where'd you learn field classification?" "Your pamphlets," she said, and by asking questions. He tapped his notes. "We need someone fluent, practical, willing to get their hands dirty, interested. You're asking me to work for the Americans? No. To help feed Europe." Silence held. Back in the barracks, eyes tracked her, not curious, judging. Someone spat near her boots. By dinner, Captain Wilhelm blocked her path, still drilling men in the yard like the war hadn't ended. "They say you're joining them," he said. "It's research, farming. They don't want your farming. They want your loyalty." He stepped closer. "You forget, Dresden. You forget who we are. Nearby men froze, pretending to eat. Metal trays scraped softly. "They offer you a shovel," he said, "and you call it hope." Helga didn't answer. Later in the tool shed, Miller checked inventory lanterns swinging over rows of dented tins. "Your captain's not wrong," he said, "but he's not right either. He thinks I'm a traitor." "Maybe. Or maybe you're just tired of being the enemy." He turned a cracked trowel in his hand. "You ever plant anything before this year?" "No." "You ever eat cornbread before this camp?" "No." He smiled faintly. "Then maybe you're still learning who you are?" Wind slipped under the boards. The lantern flickered. "If you want to rebuild," he said, "start with the soil." That night, she crossed the yard alone, boots heavy with slush. No moon, only the hum of windmills, the fence creaking in the cold. In the barracks, heat pooled from the open stove. Palms' raw nails dark with soil. She sat on the bunk and stared at her hands, the same ones that once typed radio orders in a bunker under Berlin. Same bones, different work. The offer wasn't about pamphlets or seed catalogs. It wasn't even about America. It was about what could grow again, what might survive if someone bothered to tend it. Someone coughed. A bunk shifted. She reached into her coat, pulled out the folded application. A blank line waited at the bottom. No deadline. No instructions. Her pen hovered. Dawn broke with static on the loudspeakers. No anthem, no drum roll. A Kansas radio voice read the headline, "Germany Surrenders." Trays froze midair. A spoon clattered. Someone crushed a tin cup until the handle bent. Then came laughter, swearing prayer. Helga stood by the doorway, arms crossed. Not cold, not afraid, only unsure where to set the moment. The war was over. No one moved. By mid-morning, the camp shifted into odd rhythm. Some cleaned bunks. Others wrote letters they knew would never be mailed. An old man broke a chessboard and tossed the pieces over the fence. Word spread fast release protocols had begun. Those with family in the West might go home. The rest would wait months, maybe years. One officer shouted that real soldiers fought to the last breath. No one answered. That night, returning from the greenhouse, Helga found her bunk gutted. Footlocker kicked open, mattress slit. Papers torn across the floor, some still smoldering. Agricultural journals gone. Letters from home ash. Notes from afternoons at the Schmidt farm trampled and wet. A green notebook hid beneath the bed frame, damp but whole. She pressed it flat between her palms. Flames rose high, reflecting against the barracks wall. Men fed the fire with lists and documents, the cooperation roster curling into smoke. "They're cleansing the weak," someone muttered. No Germans should work for them. No guard intervened. Ash drifted across the yard, falling like black snow. Liesel stood apart, arms tight around her waist. Their eyes met briefly before she turned away. Next morning, Miller handed Helga a clean towel and new blanket. Neither spoke. Her hand still carried the smell of smoke. At lunch, benches shifted. A man from her old unit muttered, "Better to starve as Germans than eat like Americans." No reply. Later, she walked beyond the tool shed past the inner fence. The cornfield stretched uneven stalks, knee-high, yellow-edged from neglect. She knelt where the soil softened and pressed her fingers in, dry but alive, waiting. Dirt gathered under her nails. Behind her, the smoke from burned records drifted over the wire, crossing the field, like memories, something you couldn't hold but couldn't forget. No orders, no flag, no anthem. Only the field, the soil, and whatever might follow. She rose, brushed her palms clean, and turned toward the greenhouse. The irrigation line still leaked. Someone had to fix it. The ship moved with slow, even breath. In the lower quarters, men lay in bunks, wrapped in fatigue and quiet. Metal walls, warm with engine heat, boxed them in, but no one complained. Helga sat cross-legged near a crate stamped U.S. Medical supplies boots still dusted with Kansas soil. In her lap, wrapped in muslin and tied with twine, rested a small bundle, the weight of a pocket, the memory of a field. 12 kernels of corn. Golden Bantam, Mrs. Schmidt had called them. Good for growing, better for starting over. No ceremony. The old woman had pressed the pouch into her palm, squeezed once, and turned away. Days into the crossing, the bundle hadn't left her side, not during roll call, not when a destroyer passed near Newfoundland, not even when rain slipped through a vent and dampened her sleeves. Across the hold, Lieutenant Gerhardt's laugh cut through the murmur. He strolled over, eyeing the muslin bag. "So you bring back their seeds now." His tone carried no humor. "Will you plant democracy, too?" Helga tucked the pouch under her coat. He leaned closer. "They fed us corn and you carry it home like treasure. You think America shares its soil." One look silenced him. He turned away, muttering toward the poker game. Later in the galley, she stirred batter beside 2 prisoners. No orders, no guards, just habit. Flour stretched thin with powdered milk the way Mrs. Schmidt had taught them. Someone whistled off-key. The oven hissed. Back at her bunk, she opened the notebook. Pages curled from damp. The last line read, "We lost the war, but maybe we can learn how to live." She pressed her thumb against the page until a crease marked the words. The ship swayed slow as breath. Waves didn't fight the hull. They accepted it. She stared at the rivets above, counted them again. Sleep wouldn't come. Through the porthole, dawn spread in a pale band, yellow, thin as corn silk peeled from the husk. The coat drew tight around her shoulders. The pouch stayed firm against her ribs. Germany waited not banners or parades, only soil. Bombed roads, bare orchards, damp courtyards where brass once played. No fanfare, now just ground, waiting to be touched again. She didn't know where the train would stop or who still lived. Letters had stopped months ago. Yet the bundle weighed more than food. It held a question. Was it betrayal to plant something new? A mug of coffee appeared beside her boot. The young man who offered it said nothing. She nodded, took it. Steam rose in the dim light. Metal groaned overhead as hatches opened. Footsteps crossed the deck. The sun broke clean over the horizon, a line of Kansas gold rippling across the sea like a promise. Hands once used for codes and maps now guarded seed. That seemed worth remembering. By the summer of 1946, Munich breathed through rubble. Tram lines twisted like ribs, windows gaped without glass, yet smoke from kitchen stoves still curled each evening. People cooked, queued, endured. At the city's northern edge stood a cluster of sheds with a hand-painted sign, Agricultural Education Center, U.S. Occupation Zone. Helga worked there 6 days a week. Not as soldier or prisoner, just a woman teaching others to plant again. Under patched roofs, rows of tables held soil trays and jars labeled field corn wheat potatoes, Golden Bantam. That last jar always drew questions. Farmers came from nearby villages, thin, cautious, their eyes wary of novelty. They studied the charts, turned the yellow kernels between their fingers. "Pig feed," one asked. "Next you'll tell us it sings the national anthem." No one laughed. Greta stepped forward. "Taste first," she said, "then judge." They sowed the Golden Bantam in a narrow plot behind the sheds. The soil was rubble and clay, but the Americans had sent compost and drills. Each furrow went straight, measured by rope, the rhythm of digging and covering like prayer. Children lingered by the fence, soot on their cheeks, laughter unsure but alive. One boy whispered guesses about which sprout would win. June rain softened the ground. Shoots pushed through. By July, stalks rose waist-high pale green against gray ruins. Old farmers began visiting after work. Some scoffed. Others reached to touch the leaves as if expecting deceit. Greta logged details in a ledger soil rain germination. Helga glanced over, adding quiet notes. When tassels formed, they announced a tasting. No speeches, just an afternoon to share. A GI grill smoked near the fence, butter melting in a dented pan. The corn turned slow husks, blackening, sugar hissing. The scent drifted down the street over a shattered tram stop toward the river. People followed it as if toward memory. An old man approached, first muttering that Germans didn't eat feedstock. He took a cob anyway bit, once paused, chewed again, nodded left. Greta handed the next cob to a mother and her child. The woman bent, offered it forward. Tiny teeth pulled loose a few kernels. The child smiled. "It's sweet. The mother looked up, uncertain if joy was permitted. No answer came. Around them, others began to eat slowly, reverently. Butter traced down fingers. Someone laughed, short and startled. The word sweet passed from mouth to mouth, shifting from surprise to truth. By dusk, the grill lay empty stalks, half stripped. Helga gathered what was left in a newspaper-lined basket. Greta carried another. They walked the courtyard where children's laughter threaded through the sound of hammers and falling bricks. They paused near the fence where the first seeds had gone in. The rose shimmered faintly in the last light. Greta set down her basket. "We did it," she said quietly. Helga listened. A hand-crank radio carried news from Nuremberg, voices distant, metallic. Yet among the stalks, life pulsed louder. The boy ran past again, clutching a cob, calling others to taste before it was gone. Their laughter rose light and unafraid, echoing through broken walls. Helga watched him fade between stone piles, the sound thinning into the hum of evening. For the first time in years, she heard laughter untouched by fear, just children tasting sweetness. "Keep the last seeds," she told Greta. "Next spring, we plant again." They walked back through the gate as the lamps flickered on, leaving the field to rest. By 1947, the fields outside Munich looked like fields again. Rubble-cleared fertilizer arrived, and quiet Marshall Plan machines rolled through the countryside tractors' seed trials, pamphlets printed in 2 languages. Helga stood before 50 Bavarian farmers gathered behind the agricultural center. The ground was soft from rainstalks, gold and full silk swaying above their heads. Her old jacket hung patched at the elbows, pockets lined with soil. This, she began raising a cob, is not animal feed. The faint Kansas cadence in her voice surprised even her. It's food if you grow it right. No one spoke. Skepticism carried more weight than silence. These men had lived on rye and potatoes, not corn for the table. Arms folded. Boots sank into mud. A voice from the back: "We tried corn once." 19. Grew tall, hard as stone. Even pigs turned away. Helga met the man's gaze, steady, saying nothing, then stepped aside toward the grill set by the field. Greta knelt there, turning sweet corn on a flat iron grate. Butter hissed where it touched flame. A young American officer checked his watch, anxious. Helga waved him off. "They'll come?" And they did, slowly then, all at once. Greta handed out the first ears. A village boy blinked and bit again. The old farmer followed more out of pride than faith. He chewed, swallowed, nodded once. "This isn't the corn I remember." "It isn't," Helga said. "This one was made for people." He turned the cob in his hands. "And it grows here. It does if you feed the soil, not just the hunger." Laughter rippled through the group, easy now. Men edged closer, asking about spacing fertilizer harvest time. Greta passed around folded charts stamped with the USDA crest. Helga remembered Miller's calm voice under the Kansas sun. "Knowledge is never treason." Back then it was theory. Now it lived in her calloused hands in the rhythm of teaching without command. By late afternoon, the grill was bare. Farmers wiped butter from their palms and gathered around the trial beds, arguing yields, comparing flavor. None walked away. The American officer closed his clipboard. "You did it," he murmured. Helga bent to pick up a husk. "No," she said they did. Greta joined her basket in hand. Together they circled the irrigation ditches, checking the flow. The soil looked dark again, loose, alive. At the edge of the plot, a few villagers lingered, baskets in arm. Women waited for seed. Helga filled each paper envelope, marking it carefully. Golden Bantam, 1947. The last packet went to a teenage girl holding a chipped enamel pot. "Will it really grow here?" the girl asked. "It already has," Helga said. When the crowd thinned, she stood watching the stalks bend. The sound rose like quiet applause, uncertain but real. Behind her, Greta's laughter carried across the field as the Americans folded their tables. A gramophone near the trucks played a scratchy tune, maybe Glenn Miller. The melody drifted through the rows past half-mended fences. By 1955, Munich glimmered again. Glass roofs replaced Tarp's trams, hummed through rebuilt streets, and Viktualienplatz overflowed with color. Pyramids of cabbage and potatoes lined the corners where rubble once stood. Between them gleamed something once foreign a decade ago, unthinkable piles of golden corn stacked beside the scales. Vendors called out briskly, "Süßer Mais frisch, vom Land sweet corn," fresh from the countryside. The phrase slipped through the morning air as natural now as bread or milk. Helga crossed the square portfolio tucked under one arm. Inside lay the South German Maize Expansion Report, 1955 months of fieldwork and years of persuasion, bound in gray paper. Today it was no longer a proposal. At the ministry, a man in a pressed gray suit had signed the final page without ceremony. 10 years ago, he'd called corn an American novelty. Now he simply dipped his pen, wrote his name, and slid the folder across. No speech, no apology, just the soft scratch of ink. She'd thanked him and left before he could look up. The city felt larger than memory, storefronts bright with radios, bicycles, sewing machines, the new emblems of appetite. Newspapers called it Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle. But Helga thought the miracle had less to do with money, more with the slow unlearning of pride. A brass band played near Marienplatz, loud and certain. Children wove between stalls, clutching roasted corn wrapped in paper cones. She stopped at a stand where a farmer from Augsburg arranged baskets. He recognized her from a lecture years ago and grinned. "Your Golden Bantam, Frau Richter. It sells faster than apples." He split a cob and held it out. Butter pooled between the kernels. "Try one from this year's harvest." Helga bit into it. The sweetness was the same Kansas warmth, the Schmidt farm fire, yet here it belonged among rebuilt walls and new voices. The farmer wiped his hands. "You were right," he said simply. "People just needed to learn how to grow it right." She nodded. The words didn't feel like triumph, only something quiet and earned. Down the row, a young woman counted change for 2 boys gnawing on half-cobs' faces slick with butter. Their laughter rose above the streetcar clatter. One dropped his scrambled, caught it, and laughed harder. Helga lingered. 10 years earlier, that sound had felt impossible among ruins. A group of students passed talking about study trips to America. One carried a rolled chart on maize hybrids. They reminded her of Greta, steady, patient, certain that knowledge could mend what hate had broken. Near the church steps, a woman arranged flowers beside a crate of pears. Petals drifted across the cobblestones, brushing her shoes. Somewhere, a radio played faint swing music nearly lost in the market's pulse. Helga took a seat under the chestnut tree's folder on her lap, watching the rhythm unfold. The old divides, winners and losers, cultured and crude, had thinned. Pride had given way to learning. Learning had turned quietly into living. At the far end of the square, a new vendor shouted above the noise, his voice bright and certain, "Süßer Mais, golden and warm." The cry rolled across the market like a tune. People turned, smiling, waving coins. Helga rose, buttoned her coat, started walking again. The sound followed voices, blending with the hiss of grills and the snap of kernels. She paused near the fountain sunlight scattering across the water and the heaps of corn. The color carried through the crowd, bright, ordinary, alive. Years ago in Kansas, a soldier had told her knowledge was never treason. Looking around now, she thought perhaps he'd been right. The war had ended long ago, but the work of planting, of teaching, learning, tasting had never stopped. A child brushed past paper cone high in the air. The scent lingered, sweet, sharp, unmistakable. Helga turned toward the streetcar line steps, soft on the stone. Behind her, vendors kept calling, "Süßer, Mais, fresh and sweet." The words rose and fell with the wind, drifting across the square like a hymn. For the ordinary, the sound of a nation learning how to begin again. The kettle rattled softly on the stove, a sound made for small rooms after long years. Steam curled over chipped tiles carrying the scent of potatoes and corn simmering in milk. The recipe wasn't written anywhere. It lived in her hands, now steady and simple as breath. Helga stirred, added salt, watched the soup thicken yellow with butter. On the table sat 2 bowls, a loaf of coarse bread, an old spoon bent at the edge. A knock came right on time. No need to hurry. Visitors no longer expected quick steps. When the door opened, Liesel stood there, gray at the temples, wrapped in a scarf worn thin by winters. "You still cook," she said, half smiling. "Someone has to." Helga stepped aside. They ate without ceremony, as if decades hadn't passed. Talk began lightly. Neighbors, the market, a student's letter thanking her for a lecture on crop rotation. Then came the names Miller, the Schmitz, Greta. Each one surfaced, lingered, and fell quiet again. Liesel's hands rested on the table. "Do you ever think about it?" "Every harvest," Helga answered. Outside, muffled fireworks drew their gaze to the window. Red and gold streaks shimmered above the rooftops, reflected in the glass. The city below answered with faint applause. "It's the national day," Liesel murmured. 10 years since, everything started again." Helga nodded, watching the light dissolve into smoke. Somewhere nearby, brass music floated from a radio. "Funny," Liesel said, "how quiet peace can be. It has to be. We've made enough noise." They finished the soup in silence. The last spoonfuls cooled butter film gathering on top. A single kernel rolled from Helga's spoon and came to rest against the bread plate. Small, bright, round as a coin. Once it had meant defeat. Now it was only food, ordinary kind. Liesel noticed. "You kept believing." "Not always. Sometimes I just kept planting." Their laugh was soft, tired, but warm. When the fireworks ended, a haze lingered over the skyline. Liesel rose, pulling the scarf tight. "Next week I'll bring apples. Maybe that pie you used to talk about. Bring cinnamon, too. I never buy it." Liesel smiled, touched her arm, and left. The door clicked shut, leaving the faint scent of wool. Helga cleared the table, rinsed the bowls, set them upside down to dry. The kettle still held a trace of warmth. She poured the rest into a chipped mug stirred in honey. Below, street lamps cast long, amber trails across wet stones. A boy ran past with a sparkler laughter echoing down the alley. The light flared, then vanished. Quiet returned. In another apartment, someone hummed over a radio tune from another decade. On the table, the kernel still lay plain and gold. Helga turned it between her fingers, smooth, familiar. It carried the weight of everything learned, that pride could starve a nation, that kindness could rebuild one, that a single seed could outlive 1,000 speeches. She placed it on the windowsill beside a clay pot where a young sprout leaned toward the light. Not a monument, not a memory, just something growing. The clock ticked. Wind brushed the glass. She turned down the lamp until the flame folded into itself, leaving only the orange spill from the street below. The city breathed under its own peace. No grand thought came, only the stillness of a life that had learned at last to taste before it judged. The kettle clicked as it cooled. Somewhere, a child laughed again. Helga smiled not from joy, but from recognition. The sound, like the sweetness of corn, was proof that the world, quietly and stubbornly, kept growing. Then she blew out the lamp.